Prime Minister Trudeau's Liberal Party has consistently been trailing in the polls behind Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. Recent polling has the Liberals as far back as 20 points, with the Conservatives slated for a majority government if an election was held today. But with the cooperation agreement between the Liberals and the NDP still intact, an election could be as far away as October 2025. Joining us now to discuss what's next for the Liberal Party is Andrew Perez, principal at Perez Strategies. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show, David.
So is it possible, in your view, for Trudeau to close the gap while he's still at the helm of the Liberal Party?
I think that's going to be extremely difficult. We've seen over the last 12 to 18 months the federal Liberal Party consistently trailing in public opinion polls anywhere between 15 and 20 points. We saw exactly a year ago there was a major cabinet overhaul. Several ministers changed positions. A few ministers were dropped. That really had zero impact on the party's support levels. And a year ago now, the media speculation is rife about another cabinet shuffle that might be happening later this month or perhaps early in September. There'll be a cabinet retreat in a matter of days. I find it hard to see how another cabinet shuffle would really move the dial. The only role that I think would have a bit of impact, a bit of a political upside for this government would be a change at finance. And I've said that, I think it would be prudent, both from a policy but also a political lens, to move Chrystia Freeland perhaps back into the international trade or foreign affairs portfolios that she previously held. She's very successful renegotiating NAFTA in the first Trump administration. Leave her with the deputy prime minister designation out of respect, but perhaps consider a new finance minister. Perhaps that might move the dial a bit, but not enough to make up for a 20-point deficit in public opinion polling.
On that note of a potential new finance minister, who do you think would be the best person, either currently in cabinet or outside of cabinet, to fill that role?
So there's been a ton of speculation around bringing in Mark Carney. The prime minister openly spoke to media about the fact that he's been in conversations with Carney. At this late stage of the game, I find it difficult to imagine that Carney would be interested in joining a government in its final months in power. It remains a possibility. I mean, he would obviously be an effective choice. In terms of the existing cabinet, not obvious who could take on that role. Perhaps someone like Anita Anand, who is currently the president of the Treasury Board, has an economics background, has been a strong cabinet performer. So I mentioned her as a possibility, but there aren't a whole lot of options to choose from at this point.
Now, a lot of people have argued that Trudeau stepping down, despite the fact that he says he has no plans to, they've argued that if he steps down, a leadership race could inject new energy into the party, draw that out over, let's say, a period of 4 to 6 months, and really have a new national discussion on the future of the Liberal Party. Do you think that could be an effective strategy in terms of trying to help the Liberals climb out of the hole they're in right now?
I do, David. I think that if what we've seen is south of the border over the last 3 weeks teaches us anything, it's that new leadership can reinvigorate a party and completely change the political landscape. And we saw what has happened with Kamala Harris becoming the presidential nominee and the fundraising boon that's been. Look, our system of government is different from that of the U.S. I'm not suggesting that the parallels are there in spades, but it did suggest that at the 11th hour, a leadership change actually made a difference. So I think if you're a Liberal strategist in Ottawa, you're looking at how can we close the gap? How can we begin to reassert our message and become competitive again with swing voters or even traditional Liberal voters who are abandoning the Liberals in droves? And so to me, that starts with new leadership. Now there's a myriad of other things that need to be done addressing the Liberal Party's lagging fundraising numbers, party infrastructure, riding associations that are skeletal, the Young Liberals of Canada that aren't the force that they once were. But I think a lot of those things we can begin to address under a new leader who can inject some, like Kamala Harris has done in the US, inject some oxygen and some excitement to really engage the base and drive support.
Yeah. Andrew, when we come back from the break, I want to go through, we'll speculate a little bit, but speculate on some of the names that could potentially hop into a leadership race and what some of those candidates bring in terms of pros and cons to a new Liberal Party. So stay with us. We'll be right back after this quick break. More with Andrew Perez when we return. I'm back with Andrew Perez. Andrew, before the break, we talked about speculating on some of the names who could potentially put their name forward as the next leader of the Liberal Party. In your view, who are some of the names that should be running or that are worth considering?
Sure. I mean, to be frank, the majority of them come from within the government caucus and cabinet, which I think is a challenge because I think any minister, senior minister in this government will be tied to Justin Trudeau and the unpopularity of the government. Some of the major names are Anita Anand at Treasury Board, Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister from Quebec, François-Philippe Champagne, Sean Fraser, who is a millennial, who represents a Nova Scotia riding, the Minister of Infrastructure and Housing, and even still Chrystia Freeland. I'm not sure that Miss Freeland is still interested in the job, but she's certainly been on the top of many lists over the last year or two. From outside the government, there aren't a whole lot of names. The main one that we've obviously seen intense speculation around is that of Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England in Canada. It remains to be seen whether Mr. Carney is serious about truly joining politics and putting his name on a ballot. The other name that I'm hearing, and I think it's an intriguing choice, is that of former BC Liberal Premier Christy Clark, who led a center-right coalition government of essentially federal Liberals and Conservatives, a high-profile woman from Western Canada. I think she ticks a lot of the boxes. She is very politically astute. So I think it's a waiting game right now. I think it's clear that the Prime Minister isn't resigning for the time being. There are two critical by-elections taking place in mid-September, one in Montreal, which will be a very close race, very safe Liberal seat historically, La Salle et Mar Verdun. If the party loses the Montreal riding, that could blow open the doors for another open discussion around leadership.
Now, you mentioned the by-election. Obviously, there was St. Paul's. That was when a lot of the discussion at the time had come about in regards to Mr. Carney and the potential of him throwing his hat into a hypothetical leadership race. But at the same time, there were a lot of conservative pundits who said, please put Mr. Carney at the head of the Liberal Party, and that would seek to the advantage of Pierre Poilievre, given his brand of politics. Do you think there's any merit to that maybe, despite the buzz around Mr. Carney, that may actually suit Pierre Poilievre in the next election if he were to go up against him?
Look, Mark Carney, for all his strengths, is a political novice. And so I think that would be his weakness, is that he would be up against Mr. Poilievre, who's been in politics for 20 years. Having said that, I'm not yet convinced that Carney would be a disaster. I think he has a lot of merit. This is someone that has held the most senior economic and finance roles. He is somewhat of a household name for Canadians following politics and public policy. And he is convincing, and he's got ideas for the future. And he's even been critical of the Trudeau government, criticized the recent federal budget for the volume of spending and urging Liberals to return to a growth agenda. And so he has some novel ideas, and he's willing to put a bit of space between his brand of politics and his vision and that of the Trudeau government. It's going to be an uphill battle. Again, it remains to be seen whether Carney will run, but I'm not convinced that he would be a complete flop. I think he might be a convincing leader.
Yeah, and I think you raise a very interesting point in terms of having someone who is both outside of the party formally, relatively known in terms of those who follow politics on a regular basis. So I guess, would it be safe to assume that of the people you've spoken about thus far, that he would be the most likely to be able to shake some of the baggage or maybe some of the kind of popular resentment that we're seeing towards Trudeau and the federal Liberals?
I do. Carney, Christy Clark, or perhaps another name. I'm looking for another name from outside the government that might be interested. And so Look, there are some very worthy ministers that are interested in the leadership, but I think what they're going to face is a strong affiliation with this government. It will be an easy attack line for the Conservatives and even the media. So Carney, Christy Clark, and I'm hoping there'll be other high-profile individuals from outside the government that want to enter into this leadership race.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot at play here, and some big questions. We'll see. We'll keep a close eye on those two by-elections, and if the calls for Trudeau to resign based on those outcomes increase, and we'll be sure to have you back as that develops. So thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you, David. Take care.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more headlines from Canada and around the world.